Welcome back to No Big Deal, and we are very excited to welcome our next guest, Kaylee Chappelow, who has been selling SaaS for 5 years. Did you even know that Kaylee, her first ever deal was 265K? I mean, way to arrive onto the scene. That's a bit Micah Richards, isn't it, Jack? She's been part of 2 successful acquisitions in the insurtech space and transitioned to the HR tech world with her current company, Greenhouse. She was the top rep in mid-market there and 2023 President's Club winner with 133% attainment on a $1 million quota. Pretty incredible in a down market, maybe one of the diamonds of SaaS. She's recently moved to the Big Apple, New York, from her hometown, Kansas City. Go Chiefs! Watched the Super Bowl in America for the first time a few weeks ago. She loves to travel the world and recently got engaged to her now fiance, who she met in Costa Rica at a small tech surf and sales summit. So SaaS sales power couple there. Thanks so much for joining us, Kaylee.
Yeah, I'm so excited. It's like I've been looking forward to this all week.
Hang on, your first deal was, I had a question, but I'm just going to can it and ask you. Your first deal was what? 260K?
265K. Yeah, I honestly had no idea what I was doing. I got thrown into enterprise sales because I knew the product. I was the buyer. So yeah, it was a crazy ride. I closed it and I don't think I really relished in that moment enough. And now I'm like, holy shit, that was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that's bigger than some people will ever close in their whole career. That's amazing. Okay, well, I guess that's not the deal we're talking about today, right? We're talking about a deal that you closed with your current company, Greenhouse. Tell us just was this the biggest deal you've ever closed, the most transformative deal you've ever closed, the hardest you've ever closed? Which is it and why?
I think when I look back on last year, this is the deal that taught me the most. It was probably the most challenging deal I worked, which is why I chose it today to talk about.
And tell us, when you say challenging, give us a few reasons why so.
Yeah, so I was selling to an IT government contracting company, and they were just a little more nuanced, not typical ICP. So I think for me, it was the first deal where I had to say, whoa, I don't know if we can solve their problem, number one, and number two, the best way to do it. So I'm going to have to quarterback and get some other people involved on the Greenhouse side and be really curious to see, hey, is this something that we can do, and how we can help.
And when you say ICP, do you have stacks of ICP, like ICP1, ICP2, ICP3, or do you just we can sell to these guys and we can't? And if so, where do these guys fit in the we can't? Are they far away from the we can sell?
Yeah, it's I love it, the Venn diagram, I've got two sides and this middle. I feel like they were in this middle category. Greenhouse is hiring software. So we sell to pretty much anyone who's hiring, but they had a very nuanced piece of their business where they were doing big government contracts and projects and needed to document and report things in a very different way than my normal customers did. So that's where it really was nuanced when I, started talking to him. And I think, early on in the discovery, I was like, whoa, this is outside of normal conversations, but I do feel in my gut that something's there and I feel like we can help. So that was when it's okay, put the sales hat aside and put the discovery hat and the curiosity hat on and really just dig in, knowing that maybe you're going to talk to them and we're not going to be a good fit, but we might be able to be. So that's kind of how I approached this conversation, was just from a super curious lens.
How many times during the sales process did you think or someone else tell you that we're not going to sell this deal?
Several times. So I have a pretty high win rate. It's about 22%, typical 13, 14. And my manager and I always joke, sometimes I just don't give up on deals until I know it's and not people who are ghosting or things like that, but when it's really there's maybe there's a need and that's been communicated to me and they like Greenhouse, that's when I go all in and I'm not going to give up. So yeah, several times to answer your questions, Jack, throughout the process, people were all right, are we sure we should be working this? And I'm yes, I feel it. I know it. They've communicated it to me. But I think that comes with asking hard questions. I'm not going to be, I'm not going to talk to someone who and kind of let them flatter me or anything like that. It's really having honest conversations. Okay, again, every conversation, you like Greenhouse, right? This is still your top choice. We just got to work out these reporting nuances, right? Kind of all of those little check-ins that gave me the confidence along the way to keep going on this deal.
And you said at the start as well about the gut feel. There's going to be a lot of salespeople out there who are I've got this opportunity in my pipeline. It's outside of ICP. My boss keeps telling me to kick it out the can, kick it down the road. I like it. And I've got that exact deal right now. I'm selling to a chocolate company. Everyone's like, we don't sell to fucking chocolate companies. I'm like, I don't know why. I just have this thing. I can't explain it. I'm wondering if you can. What is it about that gut feel that you just like, no, I'm going to sell, I can sell the deal to this role? And what was it
So
maybe
hard
in this one in particular?
Yeah, I think actually I was listening to this other podcast yesterday, and I think intuition is not driven by like reaction to fear. So if you're working a deal and you're like, I've got to hit quota, I can get this in. Like that's probably not a real gut feel deal. I think it comes from like a piece of like you've been doing this for a while in your experience, but also there is the logic piece and going back to like those check-ins you have to have. So like, do they have budget? Do you have the decision maker like that's actually signing in the conversation? Like, is there a real need? Why are they looking? What are the negative impacts if they don't buy? Like, so it's almost like marrying the two together of like experience and your gut, not driven out of fear, but driven out of like just knowing and like kind of having this feeling. And you got to learn what that means for you. For me, I actually like feel something like in my gut, like, okay, this is real. And then marrying that with like the logic and like taking out the emotion of the sale. So yeah, it's kind of those two things.
I have that exact thing now where like in my deal, if I looked at a med pick qualification, I don't have a lot of it. Certainly don't have like that much of a decision criteria built out or the decision process. But like the champion I have is the EB and they're already really big into it. And I feel like my gut is telling me like that is going to outweigh the other low scores I have elsewhere because the champion is so strong and so powerful and they're so bought into it. And I'm like, maybe that's what you mean there by gut feel. I think that's what you're saying is like there is a few criteria that are really stacked in your favor. It's like, yeah, don't just try and cram this in because you've got a quota to hit. Like there's a reason why these are going to buy this. And I think it's that. And I think that does come with experience as well. You know, it is an experience thing. You have to have got that wrong a few times.
Yeah. And also I think the transparency with your champion, like, do you have the relationship where you can actually be honest and be like, hey, like, tell me what's really going on internally? Like, if you don't have that, then your gut feeling means nothing.
Where were you strong that made you think you had the deal?
Where was I strong?
Yeah, in the deal, like you had a good champion, you were in with the economic buyer, you had good metrics.
I think I outworked the other reps, honestly. Like on this one, I was going up against two other competitors, and I think they just gave up because this was like a long sales process. There's like 6-7 months where normally it's more like a 3-month sales cycle. And I think it was nuanced. And he even said like, yeah, I think the other reps like just they haven't really got back to me. I don't know if they want to take this challenge on of making sure we can build out these specific reports and really hit these boxes that we have to have because of our industry. We spent a lot of time together, and it was a good sized deal, so it was worth the time. But I think people, maybe other reps, saw this as like non-ICP. I'm not going to try. There's no way we can help with. So I think the curiosity and then like the pure like grit got me through this one.
I like that because I have the same feeling when I get an inbound lead. Heaven forbid I get another inbound lead in my life. Do you know what I mean? Like, what are they? Fucking hell. I used to when I get an inbound lead, I would be like, if they're inbound and they're like, we're looking at you and so they were my favorite because I'm like, the hard part's already done. You're parting with cash. Everybody now on this call knows that you're spending money. The hard part now is just making sure you're spending money here, as opposed to I think they're easier than when, for example, it sounds like this wasn't the case here, Kaylee, but when you're going outbound to them and you've got to really try and prove that changing like the ROI or the cost of inaction or moving away from status quo is really worthwhile. Those are the ones that are really hard, really fucking hard. Whereas the ones where you're like, in this instance here, you're like, I've just got to outwork the other rep and I've just got to prove that we're the best product. Sometimes you don't have to prove that you're the best product. Sometimes you can do it on personality alone and hard craft. But they're my favorite deals for sure.
Yeah, totally. I feel like also it's like getting to know the champion and building that personal relationship. Like that was my favorite part of the deal is when and I are catching up and it's like, hey, like your wife's running a marathon in Disney this weekend. Like that's awesome. To catch up 2 weeks later. How'd it go? Like you're at your parents' house in New Jersey. And I know where like your family lives. And I think that personal connection just builds that trust to be like, okay, Kaylee cares about me as a human, and that's going to transform and show up in the deal and how she's taking care of us. And she's not going to let me buy software that's not going to meet the needs of my business.
I think that's massive and underappreciated. People do buy from people.
They do. It's real.
What was this company, because it was non-ICP, were they nervous about buying something? Because you were like, you probably didn't have a lot of social proof that you could be like, we work with loads of people in your space, but you seem like you found a strong champion that you connected well with.
Yeah, they were using a competitor that's normally used for a specific type of business. So they were sort of on like a different system that maybe wasn't fitting their needs as well. I don't know, like I don't think there's any other system that would have been better for them. So I think they recognize like we need an applicant tracking system, but we need one that's flexible enough to let us like make some different like changes and have flexibility, which is what Greenhouse is known for. So that felt like very natural. Just kind of like the fact that we could help them in the customization landscape. I think what didn't feel natural was all of the reporting and extra nuanced, data that they had to be tracking. And that's where we really had to dig in with, I had to bring in my sales engineers and be like, hey, can we do this? I think that's another thing is just when you're working a deal like this, where it's kind of gut feel and non-ICP, you've got to be ready to walk away at the end of every single conversation. I think that helps frame like, can I work this deal or not? I'm going to keep trying, but like, I know that this could be the call where this ends. So that almost like you're almost setting yourself up like to prevent the heartbreak if it doesn't go.
Oh my God, that's so fucking true, isn't it? You have to know that you got to put the work in, but once you do give yourself the ability to be like, I can walk away here, you start to perform better. I find you start to perform better because you're much less attached to the outcome. You just want to make sure it works every step of the way. And if you're willing to DQ every step of the way or qualify out every step of the way, you start to I don't know, you don't grip the bat so tight, to use an American terminology.
It's the same way, like thinking back on the absolute glory days of SaaS in 2021, 2022. Do you remember, Jack? We'd just be walking into deals with so much pipeline being like, yeah, like, do you want it? Basically.
Yeah,
it would be like
exactly.
And that confidence breeds through to the customer. I speak to other sales reps here. Like, if you can be, it does mean a lot. Like, and people can tell that even on Zoom. Like, you're there, you just do anything for the deal. You do like anything rather than like, it doesn't matter. Like, I think we'd be a good fit, but it's up to you.
I've got a question here, Kaylee. So you closed this deal, I'm assuming in 2023. So I was like, the barren winter, the long winter of SaaS, right?
Long winter.
Let's call it. I'm assuming a lot of people, hopefully, who are listening will have experienced the same thing at the moment, where deal cycles are just longer than they have been. There's like unnecessary steps in the middle that you wouldn't have used to have to do. There's questions that you would never have to answer before. For some reason, all of a sudden, we have to answer them 5 times over, and so on and so on, which I get. Everybody's a bit more cautious with what they're spending. Was there a period in this deal where you're like, I've lost it, or this is never going to happen, or this is dragging on forever? I'm just wondering if we can give advice to like sales reps out there at the moment who are just in the trenches. They don't want to keep throwing good time after bad, but they're in the weeds of a long deal and they're like, I don't think this is ever going to close. And I'm wondering if this happened to you on this deal, and was there a light at the end of the tunnel for it?
It did happen. Also, I love like talking to salespeople because it's like, oh my gosh, that was so terrible. And it's like, it wasn't just even like across the world, SaaS was like impacted so much in 2023. But yeah, I think 2 things happened where I was like, I don't know if this deal is real. One is my contact was very protective of letting his boss in, who was the ultimate signer. And I was like, ooh, that doesn't feel good because that's typically not a great sign. So that was one. We can talk through that more. The second was I brought a sales engineer on to help me basically design a specific report and workflow in a sandbox to walk through with him on how this would work for his specific business. And it like totally did not go well. He was like, this isn't what I need at all. And I'm sitting here on this call going, oh God, like this is not going to close. So those are probably the 2 things. And maybe we could talk about each of those separately.
Let's go into the first one then, which is how, in your scenario, and I think every single one of our listeners will have had a deal where they are stuck with a point of contact who doesn't let them go above them. In this specific deal, how did you overcome that?
It does happen. And it was almost like not expected because he liked Greenhouse a lot. And I was like, oh no. I think 2 things. One, getting to the root of why, like for my contact, he wasn't not trying to move the deal forward. He was owning this project. He was at a director level. He was like, I don't want to bring in my VP yet because I don't know if you can even solve my problems yet. We've got these reporting nuances, et cetera, et cetera. So it was reasoning with him, and I was like, hey, like, do you mind me sharing, like, what's the hesitation? You know, we had built enough rapport for me to ask that. And he shared that exactly. Like, it's not a no, it's a not yet. So then it was me, like, in the barons, like, you know, months going on, just checking in every time, like, okay, so if we can get this report after the sales demo with my engineers, we can bring on XYZ. Yes. Okay, great. So like confirming that, like, micro yeses along the way. So then when we did it, he suggested me, he's like, all right, we're ready. Let's like set up a call. So I think if you have that initial conversation, and it's like, you can get to a real reason why they're not bringing them in, then that's like a okay sign to move forward. I've had people where it's like, I don't want to, they're not comfortable yet. And then it's like, you've got to be transparent of like, hey, I do this all day, every day. We have a very low shot at getting you greenhouse if we don't involve higher up. So like, how can we do that? Or what's going to make you feel comfortable bringing in this person to the next conversation?
Such a good snapshot, because that is so true. And it's such a hard conversation to have. But the way you framed it there, like, you have a low chance of getting this to you for using for yourself unless you bring in somebody above you, which is a really good frame. And then on the other side of it, you said you had you said you had like a bit of communication with your sales engineer as you were going through your process. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Because that happens to everybody. And sales engineers are like, with AEs are like everybody has this moment where you're like, we aren't communicating properly.
Yeah. One, like, I came from the startup space before Greenhouse. I did not have sales engineers. So I think when I came to Greenhouse, I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, sales engineers are geniuses. And like, they're such a great resource. I had no idea really like how to work with them properly. So I brought in a sales engineer. I sent this person the example report that I wanted and that they needed. And we spent some time talking about it. But what I messed up on is I did not reconfirm before we showed it to my POs, like my point of contact, that was what he needed. So we get on the call and I'm like so pumped. I'm like, we're going to solve all their problems. They're going to buy, you know, we're going to move to the next step, meeting with his boss. And it just totally, it was not what he wanted at all. And he was really frustrated. And I just like fell on my sword. I think in life, when there is a situation of conflict, one party will make it a big deal. So you've got to be the party to like fall on your sword. And then they're going to be like, oh, don't sweat it. So I was like, hey, I'm really sorry. Like, clearly this is not meeting the mark for you. I really would like the chance to loop in my director of sales engineering, who has helped me with nuanced things like this before. Can we have one more shot? Like, can we meet in 2 weeks? And he was like, oh yeah, like, no worries. So then I had to give feedback to the first sales engineer, which is awkward because, like, I don't know, we're coworkers. I loved this person. And so that was also a learning lesson of like, how do you give internal feedback? And I think the feedback sandwich 101 is the best way. Like, compliment them, give them genuine appreciation for even spending time in your deal, and then sharing with them things that can make them better so you can both have a better chance of like winning deals in the future. That went a long way, but that was really a difficult moment for me into having to give that feedback to my sales engineer.
It's mad when you're an IC and you're an AE. Like, no one works, you don't have any direct reports, right? But realistically, you do, say, manage, like, for want of a better word, because you're not managing anybody, but you are managing the deal, right? And therefore, everybody who works on it is working on your deal with you. So you are like, to a respect, managing the CS if it's an upgrade, like the SE if it's a technical sell, the SDR if they need to go and make more intros for you. Like, you are managing the execs even who come in as a sponsor. Like, you are managing everybody on the deal together, even though you're not their manager. And also, the buck does fall with you at the end of the day if the deal doesn't get closed. They're not turning around to the SE and being like, your close rate's gone down. They're turning around to you and saying that. It's such a hard skill to learn, because, like, I don't know if I'm speaking for everybody who's an A. I'm not good at managing. That one bit of thing you just said there is like, give them the feedback sandwich. It's all I've got. I don't have any other skills. If I'm going to give someone feedback, I'm just going to tell you one good thing, I'm going to say the truth, I'm going to say another good thing, and that's it. I don't have any other skills there. You don't really get taught them. We kind of have to learn it on the fly.
Totally. Yeah. My manager was like, I asked my manager to give their manager feedback, and she was like, no, you're doing this. Like, and like, dang. But I feel like the biggest thing I learned was like not doing it over Slack, because Slack can be so interpreted. Like, I love the voice memo feature on Slack. Like, we don't have time to be setting up Zoom, 15-minute coffees here and there. Typically, like, we're pretty busy. So sending the voice memo on Slack, it can just really help making sure tone and inflection is there when you're communicating with internal coworkers. I now do that always. Like someone from marketing pinged me today and I sent them a voice memo back just to make sure that like there's no room for misinterpretation in what I'm trying to communicate to them.
Fuck yeah. No big deal. Sales tip 101. That was sick. A little Slack voice note hack there for anybody out there who's trying to dish out feedback.
And Jack as well, you know, you've got an amazing template for like preparing executives for when you bring them into meetings. I think like, you know, that's another great resource of having to prep. I like jotted down when we were prepping project management, and I'm glad we got into this. Like, it feels like every single big deal that we have to talk about on this podcast is all about how an account executive is a project manager. And then in this scenario, you know, Kaylee, you probably like looking back on it, there were two things that you probably could have done better. One, maybe like prepping more productively with your SE. Two, you had a champion. We could have actually gone in and been like, by the way, we're going to show this. Is that the right thing to show? Like there's all these different things like that you have to remember in a sales process, isn't there? So many moving parts.
I'm interested to hear about that, Kaylee. Can you tell us about what project management you did well on this deal? Because nobody lands their biggest deal in their career or their most transformative career about like learning some sort of project management skill set. And can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I do feel like you said this, Jack, too. Like we're not managing people. We are like running our own business, which is like a reason I love about sales. But I feel like what I did really well is initially in that first call, hearing my like point of contact talk and how detailed he was. I was like, whoa, I'm very high level as a person. And I like immediately was like, I'm going to need some help on this. So I, instead of trying to run with it for a bit before bringing someone in, I knew immediately that I was bringing in sales engineers to help me make sure that this was going to be going the right way. And we were going to get to the information that they needed. So I think that was one thing that I did really well. And also like managing expectations with my manager of like, hey, I'm keeping this deal, but I won't forecast it, right? I'm not going to forecast it for this month, but I'm not going to give it up. So, because that's why she cares. Like, I don't want her to look bad to our director when we're forecasting deals that aren't going to come through. So I was realistic with the timing on this deal. I did not try to like put it in quarter. I put it out, and I also, wasn't forecasting. So I think those were the two areas: managing with my manager, and then also like just bringing SEs early on when I recognized my skill set. There was a gap there that needed to be filled to win this deal.
Did you come into any like real hurdles selling to an IT government contractor when it came with actually like getting the deal over the line?
Oh yeah, so much like security concerns, and they wanted like proof of other government contractors that we worked with, so having to give references. In addition to, at one point we had a meeting with 15 of their like team members in a conference room that were from all these different departments who just needed eyes on the software. That's how intense it was to buy something, which I'd never done a demo like that. I'm like, don't know any, like, none of you actually have anything to do with the hiring process at all, but you're here from like, there was someone from marketing there, someone from, like this random government contract department I never heard of. So that was really interesting. But again, it was just like getting us one step closer and constantly confirming in the micro steps with my point of contact that this was still going to happen. This was this tool for them, and kind of narrowing down timeline too, as we got like in a later stage to get us anchored to a start date.
I don't know why I love talking about big deals, especially when you get to the point where you're demoing for a group of like 10 plus people. There's like a certain, I don't know, call me a geek, because there's a certain thrill to that. It's the orchestration of that meeting is quite exciting. Afterwards as well, you're like, I'm exhausted. Like for some reason, it's like, I don't know. It's like driving on the motorway for hours. For some reason, at the end of it, you're just exhausted for no reason, even though the SE does most of the demo. Question: it sounds though that the success of this deal was a culmination of loads of pretty well executed things. So a bit of luck, like a little few mistakes, but for the most part, a lot of well executed small steps along the way. Was there anything that you did which was like outstanding on this deal in particular that you look back on and you think that was the one thing that I did very, very well, that's perhaps like a unique skill set to you, or perhaps just a unique output on this deal that meant that it came in?
I love this question. I feel like it's like just gets like a little bit more under the hood. I think the thing that comes to mind is just I have an exceptional way of like keeping people excited for the next step and getting like that next meeting on the calendar with purpose. So instead of being like, we're just going to sync in 2 weeks, it's like, okay, when we sync in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about this, and then let's get this meeting on the calendar. And I think people really buy into that and like need you to guide them and lead them in the sales process, especially when it's this long. Like you've got to have touch points along the way, but you've got to have things to talk about. So it'd be like, okay, we need to talk about implementation, because I know, Susie really cares about XYZ. So let's talk about that for 15 minutes. Are you like, let's do that next Monday? And they're like, oh yeah, okay, cool. So I think that is something I do well, is just leading and getting people excited about the next step and meeting with purpose when you've got months and months before this thing's actually going to close.
And what strikes me there is the unique skill that you have, Kaylee, is clearly you have a very, very high emotional intelligence.
I was about to say your EQ is through the roof.
EQ, because that's like a definitely defining part of what makes certain salespeople A-star reps, because they can hear these tiny niche things in people's voices about, like, maybe they're slightly nervous about the onboarding process, or maybe they're nervous that their team might adopt this. And it's hearing those tiny, like, heartbeat moments of people's tone changing and thinking, that's the next step. That's the next step. And that is actually something that you probably can't learn.
Yeah, I know it's hard. It's like, do you nature versus nurture kind of conversation?
No, I don't think you can learn it. I think it's what sets the best salespeople out from the rest. And you don't need to be an extrovert or an introvert. You just need to be able to read a room and understand, like, there's some hesitancy in your voice there, Claire. Do you want to tell me why? And then it comes out and you're like, bang, that was the golden nugget that we needed. Okay, cool, let's do that next. And I think also I was on a call earlier, had the exact same thing. I was like, I've got to set up some next steps with this opportunity. And I had like the EV and my champion. And I was like, just going to go through the motions and be like, okay, here's what the next steps are. But they were really, like, the call was really animated. It was very emotive, and everybody was getting excited. And I thought, if I come into the room now and say, hey, does everyone want to meet next week at the same time and do this bullshit meeting? I knew everybody was going to like lose their mojo. So I was like, I'm going to have to meet them at their level. So I just did a very similar thing to you there and got like really excited with them. Be like, I know what you want to see next. You want to see this, don't you? And they were both like, yeah. And then they both brought up their calendars and kind of booked it in themselves. And I thought, the old me, like, without having ever made that mistake tons of times before, I would have just been like, okay, cool. Here's what my mutual action plan says. Who wants to meet implementation next? Like, whereas actually, like, I really sold it on this occasion. And I think that comes from a little bit of EQ, but also experience of just fucking that up myself in the past, and then realizing that nobody wants to come to that next meeting because it was like not exciting. I didn't sell it. And I think that's really useful. To ask the other side of my previous question, is there anything that you did that, I know you mentioned about perhaps the internal relationship part, is there anything that you did particularly bad on this deal that meant you almost lost it?
I think the sales engineering piece, like just putting down, like not avoiding the conflict. I could have not avoided the conflict or the conversation I needed to have with the sales engineer of like, I don't think we're there. I don't think this is right. Versus letting that come out on the call with my point of contact. And thank goodness we didn't present that what meeting wasn't with his boss. So we got it right with him before we brought his boss in, which was, I'm glad that we did. But yeah, I think I could have just had that internal conversation that was hard first to make us both look good. And even if it just took a little bit of time for me to practice the feedback and like, sit down and like, what should I say to this person? I just didn't want to do that, honestly. And I learned that now I do. I have those mid-deal or before the calls just to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, that's about a wrap, really. It sounds as though you've done a fucking good job on this opportunity, on this deal. Right? I would love to hear more about the deal, but I think we've probably got to a point where it's come to a natural end. So we've got a few questions that we'd like to wrap up on. Jack, I'll let you ask the first, and I'll ask the second.
Yeah, sure. I think we've actually ticked one of them off already, but I want a different answer. So outside of emotional intelligence and being really personable, what sales skill do you think makes you great?
I'm going to say something that's totally off the wall, but written communication skills. I sell a lot and like persuade the hell out of people via email. And my manager actually called this out. She does a good job of seeing things in me that I don't see in myself, which I think makes a really good manager. And she mentioned this to me and my team. She was like, if you need an email written, because sometimes you got to sell via email. It's not ideal, but you've got to do it. I think that's something I do really well.
Do you know what's so crazy? And I'm going to touch on that. That's such a good point. Do you ever go like with your friends and you're like down the pub or you're at a bar and they're just like, oh, what does Jack or Kaylee do? It's like, oh, they're in sales. People have like no idea about how many actual arrows we have to have in our quiver to be like successful at our job. No one gets taught how to be like really eloquent and write really persuasive emails and like counteract people or produce decks or, manage multiple buyers. It's crazy, isn't it? Just like, I think he just like sells shit and just like cold calls people.
That's a cold call. You just cold call people and people hate talking to you. That's what you do all day.
Yeah. My friends think I work in a call center. I wear North Face all day. They think I just wear North Face and go to a call center. Okay, next question. What's your favorite sales memory? And it can't be surfing conferences.
That was definitely number one. I think closing my first deal, and at Greenhouse specifically, because I was in the startup space and I came to Greenhouse to almost prove that I like could play at a high level in a high performing badass sales environment. And I think like closing my first couple of deals at Greenhouse and like maybe coming in at number one in my team last year, I think that really I proved to myself that I had what it took to be successful in this role.
Amazing.
I've got actually, really good. I've got one last thing actually. What drives you in sales?
Such a deep question. I think in the beginning of my career, I had some like people pleasing tendencies that like, this is like a really deep question, but like kind of relate to a lot of what drove me as like a child and growing up and like sort of getting out of like a trauma filled environment. So there was some like an element of unhealthy drive to like please others or like create my own life. But now I think what drives me is like helping people and also like my future and my like current family that I'm building, like I have sort of created this life for myself. That's great. And it's like, wow, if I did that by age 28, like what else is out there? There's so much more for me to achieve. And I think that kind of future and this like protecting the safe haven that I've created for myself drives me. Very deep answer, but yeah.
No, I hear you loud and clear. I was the same at the start, and then it kind of changes after a while because you realize that's quite unfulfilling. Actually, you don't get the thing that you want from it. But then after a while, you're like, oh, hang on a minute, this career is going to give me like stability and foundations, like build a life. Funny that, isn't it?
I actually think on that track, I actually have friends that like don't like working in software, but because it provides a great life, you can't give it up. Like, what are you going to do? Go and work on like maybe a quarter of the salary? And do you know what I mean? It's like that massive balance and toss up.
When you've had the success, it's so hard to like think about doing anything else with your life.
I know, it's a trap. Such a good trap.
SaaS trap. Locked in everyone.
If you listen to this episode we had recently with a friend of ours called Brian, he talks about closing the biggest deal he ever closed, and at the end of it, he was like, not underwhelmed, but he was like, that didn't do what I thought it was going to do for me. And I think that's a moment in most people's career that they get to. You're like, I think I'm climbing this mountain because at the top of it, I'm going to be like, yes, look at me. Like, I'm going to put it all over my LinkedIn or whatever. But really, you get there like, that wasn't what I was looking for. And that's when you kind of find a different purpose, which is like what you just touched on there. Our final question is, always book a meeting from a meeting. We're closers. You've got to introduce us to somebody who you think would be a great guest on the show. Doesn't need to be somebody you work with. Doesn't need to be someone you tell us right now. But if someone's on your mind, that'd be perfect. We need somebody who's going to come in and then tell us about a great deal as well.
Can't work at Greenhouse.
Wait, I actually really want you to talk to my fiance. I know that's like annoying, but like he's awesome and he's the best salesperson I've ever met. I admired him deeply as just friends for a long time in the space and watching him sell. And he sells in the most genuine way. And I think that people would get a lot from listening to him. So I'm not changing my answer. Sorry.
Keep it in the family. We've never had a husband and wife on the show before.
Nah, Jack, Lily would be fuming. She'd be like, when am I coming on No Big Deal?
All right, okay. Kaylee, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. We'll wrap it up there. Unless you've got any questions for us.
No, I just wish my name was Jack because like the whole Jack and Jack thing is really cool with the podcast. I love it.
That works, doesn't it?
Cheers. Right. Thanks so much, Kaylee.